So we can start step 3. I go there by selecting the tag. That loads the resources for this step. I take a look, so the initial file, create a balance card component with static HTML. For now, there's no dynamic behavior, but that will come right after. Create a balance card component in shared, that's pretty important. I can add a quick note, but basically shared will be all the components that are shared, as the name suggests, throughout the entire application. Feature will be for functionalities specific to an application. So inside, we'll put components that aren't present in all the other features. If a component is present in all or could be in all features, it will go in shared. So balance card will be this example here, and specifically a possible rendering in PNG. We can go check in the resources, and we have this screenshot here. Something else to understand a bit in your learning flow with this Angular course. Since we've just moved to step 3, the SRC corresponds to step 3. So if we go, and if we reload the local host of our project, we more or less have what's expected. So the goal will be to create our first Angular component. Either you can look it up a bit on your own, or I've put it in the hints for you how to create a component. NGG, which is short for generate, C, short for component, and then we give the path to place our component. So I can run it here, ngc, ngzc, features, / balance card. And it generates a first folder for me there. It's quite important, especially at the beginning, to try to validate each step as you go. So here we've just created a component without necessarily jumping straight into fully styling this component. We should try to make sure that all of this is working. In particular, as I mentioned in the previous video, the selector here in the component decorator specifies how we select this component. That is, if I go into app component, and now here I put app balance card. And balance card, of course, refers to all of this. So what this means is when I use this tag, load this component for me, meaning this class balance card component, which itself has this HTML and CSS. Okay? So looking at it, we see balance card works. It also reminds us of a placeholder. If we look at the HTML, we can see that when we create components, it always comes with this placeholder. So the goal of this step ultimately is to try to style this part a bit, to encapsulate it a little, to add a div, apply a CSS class to it not necessarily something complicated in order to achieve this result. So we can take a look together at what's in the SRC folder of the course. A class with a well, a div with a CSS class card that contains a hard-coded label and a hard-coded amount. We'll see that later on. So I'm starting to use a bit of BEM syntax. We'll see that it's actually quite useful. Here, it's unnecessary. If you don't have this, that's totally understandable. It's not needed. So we can take a look when we talk about card. The card class means there's definitely some CSS with a bit of border radius, some padding, a background, and some box shadow. For now, nothing in the TypeScript, it's all static, which is what gives us this rendering. At this point, we can go take a look at the final file. If there's no final file for the steps, it means there's a second step and ending, a second part of the step we're currently in. This can also be seen, especially when using IntelliJ, SourceTree, Git Kraken, or really any Git visualization tool where you have a tree like this. And so here we can see that next would be step 0, 3, 2. This is a course designed to quickly reach fairly advanced, even expert levels. So it's true that I don't necessarily dwell on the easiest Angular concepts. In any case, there's a insole, a help message that tells us that interpolation is done using double curly braces. The goal then is to, if I refer back to the screenshot of the result, make both the label and the amount dynamic, that is, managed by TypeScript and not by the HTML. So let's look at the code to address this addition of dynamism through the interpolation of TypeScript variables. So we've added two variables, label and amount, to define the label we had above, as well as an amount which can be a placeholder and its interpolation in HTML, which involves wrapping it in double curly braces. And actually, this tells Angular to interpret the variable we've placed inside. We can also see this keyword, which is a variable scope, protected. So there are three of them in Angular. If we don't specify anything, it's considered the same as public. That means the variable is accessible from anywhere, even from outside itself. Protected means this variable is accessible in the TypeScript as well as in the HTML. So most of the time when variables are going to be used in the HTML, we'll set them directly as protected. And finally, private, where those variables are only available within the TypeScript class, meaning that here it's no longer visible. You can see it clearly. It tells me that it's not possible, it's private, so there's no access to it. I'll obviously set it back to protected. And so moving on now to the final step, we see that this step is complete if we manage to get a result like this, which is visually identical. But on the other hand, we've taken a step forward in terms of component reusability. For example, if I now change the label from a TypeScript perspective, I see that my HTML has updated. This is quite different from very static sites, because with static sites, you write in HTML, and since the HTML is static, you have to modify the HTML for the website to update. Here, we modify TypeScript, and it's our HTML that gets updated. This is a first step forward in the dynamism that the Angular frontend framework brings us. So, as I was saying about the final step, let me recap what we've done. So we created a BalanceCard component in a shared file because it's a component that's meant to be reused elsewhere or that could be reused elsewhere. What's important in Angular and in all front-end frameworks in general is that we think in terms of components. That means as soon as we identify a display block and we associate some processing logic with that display block, so whenever we have a rendering with some logic, we need to create a component for several reasons. First, it's easier to maintain since both the display and its management are contained in a single place. If there's a problem with that part, there's a good chance the solution will be found there. So there you have it, BalanceCard, our first Angular component. Obviously, it's very simple in terms of display, but it already lets us get a glimpse of Angular components with a visual rendering and some light management in TypeScript. That wraps up step 3. And we can move on to step 4.